Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. No special announcements or anything, I guess, other than I hope to see a bunch of you at Retro World Expo later on this month, but let's jump in and see what we got. First up, on Floatplane, Amin said that the co-host for Pixel Party, that retro gaming event we talked about last week, is concerned about wear on cables and connectors for consoles. He tore his setup apart for the event, but is considering having duplicates of all the consoles to use at upcoming events. Is this something we need to be cautious of? How often do I plug and unplug your consoles? So, because I used my consoles predominantly for testing these days, I plug them in as much as you would call abuse. Which, I mean, I don't try to treat my consoles badly. They're all clean, they're all nice, but I am constantly unplugging and replugging far more than any other person normally would. And I rarely have any issues. So, of course, everything with a mechanical connector is going to wear faster if you plug it and unplug it more than a normal person would. But I would not be cautious of any of that. What I would be cautious of is irreplaceable stuff. So, you have a cable that nobody's made anymore, or no one's making it anymore, or a rare console revision. That's the only stuff, or stuff that's super sentimental, because things happen at events, right? Nobody's fault. Sometimes people just trip and fall. I tripped and fell at the post office the other day carrying a 60-pound box, and it was like a cartoon. I was like, "Ah." Some very thin lady who worked there tried to jump in to save me. I was like, no, fat guy falling, move, you're gonna get crushed. Like, things happen, right? So I would first and foremost just take anything that's irreplaceable to you and either get a duplicate of that or try to find another workaround and see what you could do. But as far as like for just a basic setup where, yeah, you love your stuff, but if something broke, you could just replace it, I wouldn't worry about that for a yearly event at all. I'm not sure I would even worry about it for a monthly event, but I would at that point say, how long am I spending every month unplugging and replugging everything? Is it worth my time to rebuy some of that stuff? But for a yearly event, I personally wouldn't worry about it. But anybody else in the comments, let me know what you think. Next up, over on Patreon, looks like Patreon made some changes to their website. They're sorting the oldest comment last, so I'll start from the bottom, and you can't see the full username anymore. I'll try my best to remember everybody's, but starting out with Steadicam Scott, they want to hook up a streaming box via HDMI to a consumer CRT that has component S-video and composite inputs. They have a RetroTink 5X. So right off the bat, you are golden here. There's going to be one problem you run into, but let me just kind of back up for a minute. The problem Scott is talking about is if you use those very cheap HDMI to composite or S-video converters, you don't have control over aspect ratio. So any TV show that was originally 4:3 is now being broadcast very often, in fact, almost all of the time, in a 16:9 frame. So you have the black bars on the side. So if you tried to use one of those cheap devices, it would kind of squish it together. So you would need something like an Extron box or a RetroTink in order to crop it properly. However, if you have component video inputs, you could use a Tink to do that, the Tink 5X or 4K, and you have full control, very low to zero latency depending on your settings. It's just really an awesome device. I'll point you to the downscaling section of the website. Marco did a full deep dive on the 5X. That's what you need. For other people, though, that's when you would have to worry about, well, what if my TV doesn't have component video input? Then you would need something like the Extron VSC 500 that could go to S-video or composite and do the same things. So that's certainly something to worry about. The problem you're going to run into is getting an HDMI to component video converter that can handle 15 kilohertz signals. A couple years ago, I said stuff like, if you bought 10, 9 would work with 240p and 480i and 1 wouldn't. And nowadays, it's the opposite. Now, 9 probably won't work and 1 will. So you could try the ones from the Amazon links that still sometimes work, but try them right away so that you know if they work or not and if you have to return them. I really don't ever abuse returning to Amazon, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So that's not a problem. And let them know, because if the companies keep getting returns for not supporting 15 kilohertz, then maybe they'll actually pay attention. Probably not, but... So that's the only tough part. You could just do something like get an HD Fury, which would definitely work, but that's 10 times the price. You're talking 170 versus 25 or something like that. So Yeah, that one's going to have to be up to you to decide what you're willing to do. Are you willing to buy a bunch of them and cross your fingers and return the ones that don't work, possibly all of them? Or do you just think, hey, I'd rather drop the money on a quality piece of equipment that I don't have to worry about anymore? So definitely give those a shot and see. But I'll leave a link to the downscaling section from Marco so you can have more info on that. Next up, Jason D said, what have I been working on this week besides the roundup? Tink VHS pass-through. Using the RetroTinks as essentially a time-based corrector and a 3D or 2D comb filter, and then using a cheap used HDMI capture card to capture raw 480i. It's very niche and it's not for everybody, but for the people who need it, they're going to definitely go nuts. 99% of people using the Tinks to back up VHS are going to be using the exact same method I showed last time. But yeah, I don't care if 2 people need it. This is something that I thought was really cool, and the people who do need it are going to really appreciate it. So a little teaser coming up. But Jason's actual question, they noticed there's nice looking GBS control scalers on Aliexpress for about 60. Have I considered doing another look at them, particularly use cases for 480i versus the RetroTink 2X and Rad 2X? So I've seen a lot of different brands, and it's impossible to try to test them all, to figure out where they came from, to figure out which ones Bitfunk's probably made. And it's so even if I did a deep dive review of one of them, there's also not any guarantee that I'm going to get the same one if I buy it again in a month. Now, I say that to be cautious. There could be some really amazing creators and sellers making these things, but my general experience with stuff like this is maybe there's one acrylic case that 4 different sellers use, and maybe there's a bunch of different motherboard revisions. So I don't really know, but if I have time to, I would love to really check it out. But I would like first to see if I could find if there's one reliable creator making these. And the fact that they're on AliExpress doesn't mean anything to me. I mean, Ivory sells at AliExpress and he's awesome. So I just want to see who's making them, and is there somebody that wants to be consistent with these things. So if anybody has any thoughts or knows any of these companies, please let me know. I'd certainly like to try the AliExpress and Amazon ones just for convenience, but I just don't want to spend the time, because I do pretty deep dives on this stuff, and I don't want to spend the time doing it and have it be like the Otaku Switch, where 3 people bought 3 new ones and had 3 completely different experiences than the one that I had bought 2 weeks earlier. That's not really fair to me or you, because you could read a review of something and it doesn't match. On either way, maybe I called out something for being wrong that's fixed on yours, or vice versa. So we'll see. But I'd like to try them at some point. A couple of questions from Christopher Skirek. First, they want to know if you could take a Wii that's GameCube compatible. So the first third-ish of all the Wiis made can play GameCube games natively. They have the ports right on them. You could put your discs in. So does that add any latency? I'm 99% sure no. I can't remember if I've ever tested it, but I would imagine that's a thing Smash players would have jumped on. And I'm pretty sure it's very similar hardware, so it's not doing something like running software emulation. So while I can't remember if I've ever tested, I'm going to give that a 99.9% no latency added there. And also, can you use something like the Electron Shepherd Wii to HDMI and then an HDMI to VGA converter to play GameCube games via a Wii on a PC VGA monitor? And the answer is yes, absolutely. That would be an excellent way to experience that. And in fact, using the Wii to HDMI and an HDMI to VGA converter is cheaper than trying to find a component to VGA converter that handles the color space without any issues. So I'll leave a link to that. Any HDMI to VGA converter that doesn't crush the colors or anything like that would be really awesome. So I'll leave a link to the Wii to HDMI as well as Kuro's analysis. And you could kind of figure out which one to use from that. Or you could just buy the absolute cheapest to start with. I think there's like $8 ones you could try and kind of go from there. But yeah, it's a great solution. And I think GameCube games would look awesome on a PC CRT VGA monitor. One more from Christopher. If they fire up the SNES Mr. Core and play a game like Star Fox that has Dolby Pro Logic encoded in the sound, will that still work on Mr.? And if it does, would it work with analog, or can you get that via HDMI or digital audio as well? And the answer is it'll work in all of them. The way Pro Logic is encoded, it's in the stereo signal. So your player, and in this case, the Mr. original SNES, whatever, doesn't even know there's extra signals there. It's embedded in that signal. There's probably great videos that explain how that wouldn't do as good. I'm not going to do as good of a job as them. So check those out if you're really interested. But just to answer your question, it has worked, or it does work, and it has worked on my setup right here in all outputs. So obviously you would need some kind of receiver that's compatible with it, but that's not going to be a Mr. versus original hardware or digital versus analog audio issue. It's only going to be, can your receiver handle it? Maybe your receiver has only Dolby Pro Logic on one of the inputs, like analog versus digital, but I don't think so. Most of the ones I've seen really just work across all of them. Most of them. There's always a weird niche use case. So yeah, that's something that I think you'd enjoy trying out if you had the ability to. And I'll leave a link to the Pro Logic video I did just for anybody who's curious. Next up, Photosven wants to know if I'm going to be trying the alternative Mr. boards from QM Tech and Taki Udon. And I'm definitely going to be trying Taki's. I hope I'll be able to buy it from the first batch, so I'll be able to review it. If not, I'll try my best to get one. And I think a bunch of other people have taken a deep look at the QM Tech one. So I think for that, I would really want to know a little bit more from a longevity point of view. You know, as people continue to use it, are they running into any hiccups, or is there something strange that could only happen on that and not be reproduced on an original DE10? And from every other point of view, I'll be testing Taki's just because it's going to be mainly a drop-in replacement. Small little things that I'll kind of go over, but they both seem very promising, and they both seem like a better option only because of price. But, well, Taki's has a couple of things that might be cool as well. But yeah, so I'm going to test Taki's. I might test the QM Tech if I have time. No disrespect to them. It's just there's already people who have been testing them, and no one from them reached out to me anyway. So it's not like I had an early review unit to try or anything like that. So yes, I do want to test it out because I do think from a price point of view, these could get a lot more people into Mister. So fingers crossed that they're both really good. Next up, Danny Funker wanted to give everybody a brief update on the Video 8 High 8 digitization effort. They ended up getting all the parts they needed to tap the Sony camcorder and were able to rip video using a Domesday method. So it's raw RF. I don't like to say that because people who aren't familiar think I'm talking about the little coax screw port and back. So I'm just going to keep calling it Domesday until the people who are working on VHS decode stop talking to me as a result. But they said the YouTube compression that they posted for some of the clips did remove some of the enhancements that they saw from using Domesday, but they did also want to confirm that it took about 12 hours to render 10 minutes of footage. So it's a much longer process, and that's what I'm definitely warning everybody about for this. I still love the project, but it's not going to be for everybody. Also, they found that the colors are a lot better from VHS decode. That could be your capture card that you're using. A cheap capture card that you have to adjust the sliders. Maybe the sliders in the default position aren't going to be correct. So using Domesday eliminates that because you have the raw signal. And if you don't like the way the colors came out, you could try to process it a little different. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a Domesday enhancement. Maybe it is, though. Also, they said the video seems smoother, however, that could almost surely be a result of the deinterlacing. I'm finding in these latest tests that I've been doing that I totally missed for the first round of testing that a lot of deinterlacing, especially stuff that does it built in, like those little like VHS capture boxes you buy off Amazon, will drop half of the fields. So you're losing, it's essentially turning a 60 frame per second image into a 30 frame per second image, or they're blending it together in a way that's kind of ugly. And it's, if you don't deinterlace properly, then you're going to just destroy the look of it. So that's really one of those things that's another one of the many reasons why just buying a Tink 5X and an S-Video VCR might get you just exactly what you need, because you just pop out 1080p. And no, it's not as good as Domesday or raw ripping with QTGMC deinterlacing, but it's also like effortless. You load up that profile and you're done. Yeah, I mean, keep us up to date with anything that you find. Hopefully somebody will whip up a GUI for this thing, and I will absolutely get to it soon. I finally have, thanks to Zaxor, a Laserdisc player here that has Domesday built in. It's actually my friend's, but I'm lucky enough to be able to borrow that. So what I would really want to do is a live stream with somebody from the Domesday crew ripping maybe just a quick segment of a Laserdisc and going through the process. And then after the stream's over, I'll just start ripping some of the weirder and rarer Laserdiscs that I have just to try to do the main feature of it. Get a bunch of other people to do the same thing, combine our rips together, and have one AVI file of it or something that's uncompressed that is better than any one of the Laserdiscs could be. So that's the stuff I'm most excited about. And if it is a noticeable difference, I would really love to do that for a few weird and rare heavy metal VHSs. Anybody remember the Rusted Pieces? I just lusted over that. Every time I saw it in a magazine, I was like, oh man, I want a Megadeth video. This would be great. And I finally got it years later. I was like, oh, it's a couple of videos and some bad interviews, but whatever. It's still one of those things where it's a moment in history that any 90s metalhead would love. So, I don't want to just watch a badly ripped version on YouTube. I'd love to have a really good quality that's scaled right. So I'll try to work on all those. Next up, a couple of questions from Oliver Clare. They have an Gscart Crosspoint video matrix switch with 12 inputs and outputs, as well as 12 audio inputs and outputs to match. They're integrating this with their existing Gscart switches so that they could leverage all of the inputs. Basically, each BNC input on the Crosspoint would effectively support 8 SCART-based consoles through the Gscart switches. And Oliver's got a setup that absolutely works perfect. However, I want to clarify alternatives in case you haven't already bought the pieces or if anybody else wants to try something similar. First, the Gscart switch is output to a SCART cleaner via just a standard SCART cable. If you wanted to, I think you could also use a SCART coupler if you had good strain relief as well, but that's fine, except the SCART cleaner is designed to make sure that sync is completely clean with no other signal on it running at the correct voltage. I'm pretty sure what you would get from a Gscart's output is exactly what the Crosspoint would need anyway. So I'm pretty sure you could have just taken the Gscart switch and had just a custom SCART to BNC cable made, and that's it. You would just have to turn on the sync stripping circuit for any of the Gscarts. They all have them. They're all slightly different, but they would all work perfectly in the scenario that you're describing here. So if you've already bought the SCART cleaner, there is zero things wrong with what you're doing. I would just make sure that the Gscarts all had everything turned off. So that way you don't run a sync stripper through a sync stripper. Probably won't hurt anything, but it's better practice. And from that point of view, you would just use the SCART cleaner to have the sync stripper on. And I would turn the low pass filter off because that's really designed for capture cards. And if you mix multiple low pass filters, you get slight softening on the image. Now I say slight because you would have to put your nose up to the screen in order to actually see it, but it would be there. And if it's a flip of a switch, why not just make sure you're getting the sharpest output possible? Next, the SCART cleaner outputs via a VGA to BNC cable into the Crosspoint. So once again, that's totally fine, but you could just get actually, I believe there's going to be another SCART to, so right now, the other one that I have, the HD15 to SCART, there's going to be the opposite of that for this exact reason. So you could just get a longer VGA to BNC cable, plug it into that, and have that coming out of your Gscart. So what you have totally works, but that would have probably saved a bit of money. Next, audio is routed from the SCART cleaner to the Extron using a 3.5 millimeter to RCA left-right stereo cable. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. However, if you were going to make a custom SCART cable, SCART to BNC, you could probably ask for Phoenix connectors to be added to the end of those so that you could have just everything contained in one cable. Next, the Crosspoint outputs via a BNC to VGA cable into a Rondo HD15 to SCART. That is perfect because the HD15 to SCART allows you to make sure that the sync that's coming out of the Crosspoint is at the proper level for SCART devices. So that one you would have needed no matter what. Good call. And audio output from the Extron via Phoenix to RCA adapters also are routed through the HD15 to SCART adapter. Totally fine, and you could also have multiple audio outputs to multiple things like I used to have here if you wanted to. So some questions, which I think I may have already answered, but I'm going to go through them anyway just in case. The SCART cleaner has 2 toggle switches, one for the low-pass filter and one for the sync stripper. The HD15 to SCART adapter has a toggle switch to combine H and V into C-Sync compared to having it just regularly set to C-Sync. So in this scenario, you would want the HD15 to SCART set to just RGB-S mode. So it passes RGB-S. The sync signal goes through a resistor that drops the voltage down to safe levels, and you're good to go. And I'm pretty sure if you left it at RGB HV, it just wouldn't work, which is fine. It's not going to hurt anything, but you just flip the switch. For the SCART cleaner, you would just have the sync stripper on and the low pass filter off in this scenario. Next, their model of Gscart Crosspoint has 2 rows of Phoenix audio outputs, and the Phoenix to RCA adapters aren't stackable, so they could only use 6 on the bottom row. Are there Phoenix extension adapters that can get around this problem? Yes, absolutely. There are Extron branded ones that are little pigtails that plug into the port, and it's like a 3-inch cable with RCA's jacks on the outside. You would definitely want to look for those. Or once again, if you haven't bought all these cables, you could just get the custom cables made if you want, that could route all of the stuff however you would want it. You also should be able to make your own fairly easy. You can get some Phoenix connectors with the screw down terminals in it and just get a long RCA cable. So let's say you need 10 feet of cable. Buy a 20-foot cable, cut it in the middle, and then you splice just the ground and the signal into those things. It's very easy. No soldering required at all. All you need is a wire stripper and a screwdriver, and that should be it. So you could certainly try that. You also mentioned the dip switches on the Gscart switch. If you're going to stick with this, if you've already bought everything, I would leave all of the switches off on the Gscart and then just let the SCART cleaners do all of that for you. But if you ended up with the custom cable solution instead, then yeah, you're going to want to enable sync regeneration or sync stripping or whatever on each of the Gscarts. The other thing you might want to try too, if you haven't already bought all of this stuff, is you could totally have found one of the original Gscarts that has a D-sub output and just run that directly into the Gscart Crosspoint, and you don't really need anything custom because it's already got a D-sub and an audio output on it. You'd still need the Phoenix connectors for audio. So just to reiterate, everything you did is totally fine. There are no problems there. If you already bought it, you bought some extra stuff that maybe if you wanted to, you could just sell it locally, just on your local eBay. That way people could save on international shipping and buy the custom cables. You could leave it as is. It really doesn't matter. It's what's most convenient for you. My gut's telling me having those extra USB power supplies might be a pain. So if you had to resell them, that might actually be worth it for you. But these weren't super expensive devices. So if nothing else, I would keep one. Even if you sold the rest, keep one SCART cleaner at least, because you're going to use it in your setup as a tool in your toolbox. There's going to be some time where you're going to go, I need to troubleshoot. Let me remove something from the chain, and you're going to want to use that. So great setup, and hopefully I was able to clarify a bunch of this. Well, that's it for this week. If you're new to these Q&As, ask any question you would like wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post, because the way the services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw today, I really like just scrolling through the services in real time and having a conversation as if we were hanging out somewhere, just having a chat, like at an expo. So, I try to make these very laid back, and, I make mistakes all the time, but I try my best to correct them when I do. And I just like to have a chill, laid back conversation with you all. So any question you want, fire away. And as always, thanks to everybody who supports in absolutely any way, because it's you who's keeping it all going. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week.